So the final example we'll talk about is the whole one of the rent control, which is a obviously very interesting topic to the author of our textbook. So again, we could have an equilibrium market for apartments with a demand and a supply and an equilibrium quantity and an equilibrium price, which of course would be the rent of the apartment. And rent control would put a ceiling on the price, and if the ceiling is below the equilibrium, it will be binding. It will have an effect. So this would be the rent controlled price, and this, of course, would have the effect of reducing producer surplus a lot, and also reducing the number of apartments that are available. And of course bringing the rent down to that controlled rent. So for the people that are able to find an apartment at the lower rent, they really win, and their consumer surplus has gone up a lot. So I'll show you that in green here as the consumer surplus for the people who are able to rent an apartment. There are a lot of people that aren't able to find apartments. There's a deadweight loss here due to the fact that the number of apartments aren't available. And of course, the producers are really squeezed, and it leads to inefficiencies like them not wanting to keep the apartments up. And of course, there's a whole lot of people out here that would be looking for an apartment at this lower rent. And so you have all this search cost, all those things happening, and it's even possible that one of these people could get the apartment instead of somebody that actually would be willing to pay a lot more. And so we would consider that inefficient. Now, the problem is that if the government just took away the rent control, then these people down here who have been paying this low rent and who have enjoyed this consumer surplus are suddenly going to see their rents go up, and they're not going to be happy. But we will see more apartments in the market, and we will see more people able to find apartments. But the folks that were in the rent-controlled apartments, they're clearly losers from a policy to remove rent control. And some of them might be low income and therefore not able to afford the new market rent. And so the government might decide to subsidize rents for low income people. And how would that affect this graph? Well, you think about it, it makes sense probably that apartments, rent, housing is a normal good. And that the government subsidy is like an increase in the income, at least for those folks who are able to get the subsidy. And so for the overall market of potential renters, the income of this group has gone up if the government is providing a rent subsidy, even just to a portion of that population. So this would actually have the effect of shifting the demand curve for apartments out. And let me switch over to green. I'll use green for the control. Well, maybe I'll just switch to red then for the subsidy demand curve. So the demand curve is going to shift out. This, of course, will move us to I'll put an S for subsidy, a higher quantity, and a higher price. The rent will actually be higher because of the government subsidy. Now, this creates, again, winners in terms of the people who actually get the subsidy. They win, and the landlords clearly win. They're going to offer more apartments. The producer surplus goes up quite a bit because of the subsidy. And the people who lose are the folks that would have been able to rent at the old equilibrium price, but because of this new people who are able to pay a higher rent because of the subsidy pushing up the rents, they're obviously going to lose. So the consumer surplus is going to be squeezed, but it's to the benefit of the folks that actually get the subsidy. So there are winners and there are losers. Probably this is a better situation than rent control, where we had fewer apartments available. At least we have more apartments available. We don't have the deadweight loss of mutually beneficial transactions being prevented. But there is this question of course, the government's paying for the subsidies, so how those taxes are raised could be have its own inefficiencies and have its own problems, as well as pushing up the rents for the other people who aren't able to get the subsidy and seeing their consumer surplus reduced because of the higher rents that they face, because of the effect that the rent subsidies have on the overall demand curve for apartments. So that's it for that particular section. The market strikes back, and have a good weekend.